I want to talk to you today about the concept of personhood. Normally, who a person is, what a person is, would not be in need of a definition. This is philosophy, and it is also the law, and so we have to have definitions so that we qualify what we're talking about, and we know how the law applies, who the law protects, and who the law doesn't protect. The definition of personhood really finds its origin in an abortion case called Roe versus Wade in 1973. What's at stake here is a woman. Her pseudonym is Jane Roe. She wants to have an abortion, and Texas law forbid it. So she sued and took it to the circuit courts of Texas, and the circuit courts ruled that she did have right to sue. Now, in deciding that, it works its way through the Texas judicial system, works its way through the federal appeal system, and finally gets to the United States Supreme Court. The court found that they had to make a decision, a distinction, or if there was a distinction, between a person, a woman, and her fetus. In other words, is the fetus also a person or is it not? Now, the reason that's important, we go back to our concept of moral standing. People have full moral standing. If you're not a person, you still have moral standing, but you have less than full moral standing. And so you can do some things to some entities that are not people and therefore do not enjoy full moral standing that you can't do to people. Now remember, again, in 1973, we don't have the biomedical advances we have nowadays. We have these incredible little cameras at the end of tubes, and you can literally insert it into a woman. You can see this on Nat Geo or a Discovery Channel, one of the educational channels on cable. And they literally can snake it up through a woman's fallopian tube up to her ovary, and we can literally watch an egg come out of the ovary during ovulation time. You can see the sperm swim up to it, a sperm enter into it. You can watch the egg become fertilized, divide 220 times as it works its way down the fallopian tube into the woman's womb, attaching itself to the wall, becoming an embryo, and eventually becoming a fetus. So this was a very important decision. Well, the court didn't have access to this kinds of information. And so in 1973, the court made a definition that they thought was adequate based on their understanding of physiology or biology and their philosophical approach to what was necessary for a being to be a person. And this is what they decided. They decided that if you were self-aware, self-conscious, and rational, that you were a person. In other words, that you were self-aware. You could distinguish yourself from any other person in the room. You were self-conscious. You could think about yourself in terms of who am I, what do I want, my needs, my hopes, my goals, my fears. And finally, that I'm rational, that I have the ability to sit and think through my problems with what we call critical thinking and make decisions that are important in how we direct our lives one direction or the other at various stages of life. Now, there were three exceptions. There were newborns. There were diminished capacity, people who had been self-aware, self-conscious, rational, but had fallen into Alzheimer's or dementia or Parkinson's disease. And then, of course, we included young children or fetuses, newborns, that were genetically defective. Now, why newborns? Well, the court decided, as it looked through the law that it had available to it, to see if, well, is there a definition of a person here that we can rely on? Now, quite frankly, the law says nothing about who or what a person is. But as they searched through it, they found in the 14th Amendment this interesting phraseology, this interesting wording. The 14th Amendment says any person born in the United States is automatically a citizen of the United States and appreciates the full value of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, that doesn't say anything about personhood, does it? Well, it does. The court slowed down its reading. Let me say it for you again, and now I'll clarify it. The 14th Amendment says any person born in the United States. Let me repeat that again. Any person born. And from that, they decided or deduced that a person becomes a person once they're born. Any person born in the United States is automatically a citizen. And so they decided then that newborns were people because there's a rough reference to it in the 14th Amendment. Again, genetically defective children, they're born. They're not going to be able to become self-aware, self-conscious, or rational, but they're born. Newborns eventually, we believe, unless there is some problem with their development, will become self-conscious, self-aware, and rational. And people, again, who are of diminished capacity were self-aware, self-conscious, and rational, but they've lost that capability. So in 1973, the court defines a person as any entity or being that's self-conscious, self-aware, and rational, and the three exceptions: newborn, genetic defects, and diminished capacity. That definition still holds true for today. It affects the abortion decisions that we're still making, and it also now has come into play when it comes to the embryonic stem cell research. There's another concept or idea, definition of personhood. Since 2003, when we invented supercomputers, we applied them to the human genetic makeup. We call it the Genome Project, G-N-O-M-E, and we now have a complete picture of what the genetic makeup is of a human being. 23 male and 23 female chromosomes. There are some exceptions, a 24th chromosome, and we end up with a Down syndrome baby. But by and large, 23 male, 23 female chromosomes is the genetic definition of a human being. Every living thing on the planet shares the same genetic pool. Chimpanzees are known to be about 98.5% share our genetic pool, but that does not make them people. Women who give birth are never worried about giving birth to chimpanzees, apes, gorillas, orangutans. If it walks like a duck and acts like a duck and talks like a duck, we're going to put our money on the fact that it's going to be a duck. Dolphins share 50% of our DNA. They are not people. Daffodils share, I hear, 34% of our DNA. They are not people either. This is called a sanctity of life definition. It's come into play in this particular year, in the end of 2011 and 2012, and it will come into discussion and perhaps make changes in the definition of a person and how we approach the issues of abortion and embryonic stem cell research. But for now, the prevailing definition of a person is someone who's self-aware, self-conscious, rational, with the three exceptions: newborns with genetic defects, and those who now suffer from diminished capacity.